Living brave. Living brave is a mindset, it's a methodology, it's an approach, it's a frame of reference for living a brave life. It's a way for individuals to be able to define themselves as living brave by being able to say, I am living brave. It's a way for families and teams and different cultures and businesses to be able to say, we are living brave. It's a way of navigating the complexity that we see in the world. And it's a little bit grand to say it, but it is a way, I believe, of us being able to do our part in saving the world. Because we are the jigsaw pieces and we are the component parts that are the experiences that we have of each other. And I believe if we can frame the world through a lens of living brave, then the world becomes a better place for it. Now, does the world need saving? Yes, I think it pretty well does, and at the very least what it requires from us is that help and that guidance in doing so. So what is the world? Well, the world is a beautiful place. It offers us things such as babies being born and puppies to fuss and friends that tell us silly jokes and even rude ones that we can't then tell anybody else and sunsets that we can see. And right now I've been watching a cat that the owner has dressed up as a shark that they have on an electronic vacuum cleaner going around a kitchen, which seems to serve no purpose whatsoever. It's got 12 million hits. I might be 2 million of them. And every time I watch it, it just reminds me that the world is a beautiful, crazy place. But the world is also a complex place. It's a difficult place. It's a dark place in many ways. We have illness and we have disease. We have bullying. We have abuse. We have wars. We have the things that say, even though the world is beautiful, it is also at sometimes quite beastly. And as human beings, what we're trying to do is to find our path in the world. What we're trying to do is navigate to who it is that we're trying to be and what it is that we want to become. And if that's not enough, we have to do it while the world presents us with the beautiful things and the beastly things. So how does the world feel right now? Well, better than it's ever been. Historically and statistically, the world has never been so good. We have life expectancy longer than it's ever been before. We have less deaths, less wars, less disease. And with that comes a kind of a question as to why we have a situation where actually what it feels like is that there's more doubt, there's more anxiety, there's more fear for a lot of people in the world. Where does that come from? I'm a firm believer that it's the digital age, that it's the information age that we're living in that is having that impact. For me, if you can think back to when, if the Vikings invaded, they would have come in, they would have destroyed a village, burned it to the ground, stolen everything. But you got to hear about that dependent on your proximity to it. It may very well have been that it would have taken hours, days, weeks, months, even years, dependent on where you were in relation to that to find out. But now, of course, what happens is straight through to your smartphone. There is now no sacred space for you to be safe so you can regenerate. You're in your bed before you go to sleep. You're having a moment on the loo, and there it is, straight through onto your mobile phone. It used to be that when work wanted to make contact with you, they had to wait for you to go back to work. But now, of course, you don't get that. It's straight through onto your smartphone. And not only is it about the proximity, it's about the abundance, it's about the amount, it's about the acceleration of it. From 1980 to 2008, there's been a 350% increase in the amount of information that we take on board. We now, each day, take on board on average 34 gigabytes of data. That's the equivalent of 22 feature films, plus 100,000 words as we come into contact with other people. And that has had, in my mind, a huge impact on our relationship with the world. I liken it to cows, strangely enough, which is that 10,000 years ago, we domesticized the cow. And we did that so we could have milk. Now, actually, 75% of the population in the world is lactose intolerant. So that's stomach cramps, bloating, nausea, diarrhea, all those lovely things that we get with lactose intolerance. So you would have thought that what we would have done is recalibrated our relationship with milk. And we've had 10,000 years to do it. And we haven't done that. Now, in terms of the digital age and the information age, we haven't had 10,000 years. If you take that as a metaphor for how we've domesticized milk and we've domesticized digital, we've only had about 30 years, really since the 1990s when the internet really came into full flow. And this has had a huge impact, I believe, on politicians who speak to us in sound bites because they don't believe that we can take the long-form message. We have business leaders who are forcing a set of actions and activities from the workforce to move faster because of their own fear of innovation and what the next challenge to their business model will be, and that's having a direct impact on workforces. And the media is feeding us a 24-hour stream of data that is predominantly in the negative, but it's now more important to be first than it is to be right. And this is impacting on us as humans and as a society. And the impact is quite obvious. We have 14 million work days lost to stress in the UK each year. In the US, we have 40% of the workforce not taking their full holiday entitlement because of the fear of what will happen if they're away from the workspace. In terms of fairness, we have 50% of household wealth sitting with 1% of the population. And in terms of trust, the Edelman Trust Barometer this year says that trust is at an all-time low globally, against 4 major indicators. So that's government, that's business, that's not-for-profits, and the media. So that means that the lowest amount of trust in the recorded history of that document is that we don't trust our politicians, we don't trust our leaders, we don't trust our news, and we don't even trust the charities. So what does that mean to us? Well, the story for me of Living Brave means that Living Brave has to operate for us as individuals, for families, for teams, for businesses in that platform. It's always been complex, but now it's just at such an accelerated rate that if we don't have a way of directly pushing back on the pressure of the world, it starts to dictate to us the way things are as opposed to us dictating to the world. Now, my story for Living Brave started to be really the catalyst for me speaking to you now. My father was married 4 times and my mother was married 3 times. My father's 4th wife was the mistress he had with his 2nd wife. So you can see no trust issues or relationship issues for me in any way. I once came home to find that out of a set of 3 bedrooms, my bedroom had been moved from the end into the middle bedroom. And my father now was with his partner in the one end room, and my mother was in the other bedroom with her new partner. Again, no damage done to me in any way at all. Because of that, I'm having a slight flashback now, just thinking about it and getting slightly warm. One day I came home from school and unfortunately, I found that my mother had tried to kill herself by taking an overdose. And one day my father took me into the garage and with a rope whipped me. Now I share that knowing that that was my catalyst for trying to find what living brave might mean to me. I know that other people could look at that and say, "Guy, you had it really easy. I wish I'd have had it that easy." Other people may look at it and go, "Gosh, that was horrific." Everybody's context, everybody's volume control is on a spectrum, and it's all set differently for the things and the challenges that will occur to us. For me, I was directly trying to understand what was happening to me. I felt weak. I felt that I was a coward. I was challenging myself to say, where is your bravery? Why aren't you being brave? Why don't you live brave? Why aren't you living brave? Why aren't you living brave? What would that look like? Am I living brave? So I found that vocabulary, that mindset that was for me about wanting to be somebody that would be living brave in life, to extricate myself from an emotionally damaging situation. And I was able to do that. But I didn't have the parts of the mechanic that meant I could go and help others. And it always stuck with me as something I wanted to achieve. I wanted to be able to take to other people the ability to be living brave. Because when we have that anxiety, that doubt, that fear, that frustration, when we feel pressure or threatened in the world, then to have a direct way of approaching that, I feel, can be very powerful. We have maybe friends that gossip, or a boss who's a bully, or maybe we have a sense of our own doubt around whether or not we're attractive enough or intelligent enough or capable enough to do a TED talk or something along those lines. Or maybe the world just feels a little bit heavy and we feel it in ourselves or we see it in others. So the component parts for me was what I was looking for. So I would think about people like Claudette Colvin, who as a black 15-year-old girl on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, the law was that if a white person wanted the seat, that she had to give it up. And at 15 years old, she said no. So I wanted to know where that bravery came from. I think about Malala Yousafzai in 2012, who was shot in the head by the Taliban because, as a woman, she wanted an education. So I wanted to understand, where did that bravery come from? And it's something I couldn't really, I understood what it was, but I didn't have the parts behind it. And then one day, rather circuitously, I was in a car park and came across a gentleman called James. I didn't know his name at the time, but we'd arrived in a car park at the same time. I was going to visit an office, and as I was walking across the car park and this gentleman was walking beside me, there was a young man smoking a cigarette, back when you could. And he had the cigarette, took his last puff, and he flicked it, and it went onto the floor. And I remember, to this day, James going, "Excuse me, fella, would you mind picking that cigarette back up and popping it in the bin?" And this young guy looked at James, and I think he was making a judgment call as to how senior he was in the business and whether or not he should actually pick it up and put it in the bin. But he did so, made the decision that he was. He picked it up, put it in the bin. James went, "Thanks very much." We went into reception of these offices, and I signed the visitor's book. And I was expecting James to show his pass and be sent through, because he obviously worked for the company, and he didn't. And I was really surprised. He signed the visitor's book. In fact, I was more than surprised. I was absolutely shocked, because this is somebody that had just taken issue with somebody in a car park, in a business he had no span of control in, but he obviously felt it was something that he needed to do. And it came to me about where my personal bravery was, because my personal bravery had been linked back to when I was trying to extricate myself from a very personal situation, which I had been able to do. But my bravery had been very isolated to my personal need. So when I started to think about people like Claudette Colvin and Malala Yousafzai and James, I recognised that their living brave actually sat outside of their particular need. They had a personal driver that drove them, but it was also about being brave in the world, which was something that I recognised that mine was very kind of local to me. And I had been brave as I'd gone through life, but quite selfishly for my own need. So I was able to take some time to have a conversation with James, and he was able to point out some of the component parts to me, not because he had the language. I now had the language to ask the questions, and I was able to ask him questions that were able to tell me what is it that made up living brave. And what became apparent was, first of all, I had the question. I already had living brave and wanting to live brave, wanting to be living brave as a mindset. I already had the question, which was, and it's something that we can use at any point in our lives when you feel that anxiety, that pressure, that threat that may be upon you, which is, am I living brave? And in speaking to James, what I realised was he had a compass bearing. He had an absolutely vivid, strong representation of where he was trying to go and the person he wanted to be in the world. And I recognised that I'd inadvertently done the same thing. I knew what bad was, because I was in bad. What I wanted to do was move to a strong representation of something that was more nurturing to me emotionally and wouldn't damage me. So I was looking for that. I had a strong compass bearing. And of course, when I reflected on people like Claudette Colvin, you reflect on people like Malala Yousafzai, they had a strong sense of wanting that personal bravery so they could apply and move towards a strong vision. So having that compass, what does good look like? James also was accountable. That was absolutely clear in conversation with him. He put no responsibility onto somebody else, even if the responsibility actually should be with somebody else. He recognised that he had to be the person that did it. And I was able to make that link back to my life and recognise that I'd been accountable, even though somebody else, maybe because of the age I was, should have been being responsible for me in different ways. I'd taken accountability to extract myself from a situation. So it's about having that compass bearing. It was about being accountable. I also could see that James was present. He didn't defer to a later time. He wasn't bewitched by an agenda of getting to a meeting or going to meet somebody else or whatever it is that he had. He recognised for him to be able to defining himself as living brave, when something happened in front of him that he wanted to apply his thinking to and his perspective to, it had to be done in the moment. And of course, that was exactly the same for me. It couldn't wait years. It couldn't wait months. It had to be something that happened in the present or as near to it as was possible. And also, James was fully willing to be somebody who would contribute, and that was absolutely key. He recognised that he was the catalyst, he was the action, and he would be the power behind it. So he had to be the one who was willing to contribute. And again, I recognised within myself that that was exactly the same thing. Nobody would come and save me. There was no white knight to come and take me away. I had to be the contributing force to make the changes that I wanted to make. So for me, what I now had was a clear sense of what it is that it might be for us as individuals, as families, as teams, as work environments, to be able to say, do we want to operate with a mindset that is living brave? If we are, then when things are not going in our way and we find that we have those tensions that we want to challenge ourselves again, if you want to be able to say, am I living brave? And the answer to be yes, you need to have a clear compass bearing. You need to have absolutely the commitment to being accountable. You have to be absolutely present with the moment that you're in and not defer it, and be willing to be the person that is actually going to do the contribution. If you can say yes to those things, even if you're not getting what you want, you are living brave. Because living brave isn't about it going your way. Living brave is about defining yourself as living brave while what happens to you happens to you. And that's absolutely key. For you, if you're not doing any one of those things, then you need to make the adjustment towards it to be able to define yourself as being able to do that, and to maybe help or guide others to do the same. So for me, what I hope is it's an offering for you to be able to take on a way of thinking about living brave, to maybe ask yourself the questions, am I living brave? And to be able to have those component parts that will maybe work for you in the future. So on that note, I leave you with a question, which I'm sure you can guess, which is, am I living brave? Thank you.